Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. This is Patrick Brown. Welcome to the Change Matters podcast. I'm your change architect. How's everybody doing today? This is our February edition. Clearly, we're kicking off Black History Month, of course, so we're grateful to be here. If you're out there, let me know. Let's get the likes up. Let's get the shares up. If you're out there, let me know that you're watching. If you're out there on YouTube as well, let me know that you're connecting with me this evening. I know that today's podcast, specifically, I had a guest, Bishop Joey Johnson, who was scheduled to be on. We had to reschedule that, so we will have him at a later date, but we're still going to engage in some conversation today that I think is going to really be transformative for us. And, of course, here at the Change Matters podcast, it is about conversations in creative spaces. And one of the key thing about dialogue is that if you want to change the direction of a thing, you want to change the conversation. And then when you change the conversation, you want to change who joins it. So it's important that we change conversation by including, by having dialogue, by expanding the dialogue. And so that's what we're about. So we'll definitely be revisiting, interviewing him and talking about his new book as well, which I'm actually tonight going to do a book review of 3 books. So yesterday was Read Aloud National Day for Read Aloud, actually. So what we'll do today is we'll dive into 3 books specifically around Black history, around theology, to give us some perspectives on the importance of developing repositories, documenting our knowledge, documenting our information, being able to tell our stories, and how critical that is to us be able to grow and expand. So that's definitely one of the areas that we're going to focus on. So if you're out there, let me know that you're there this evening. Please go ahead and share if you will. Let's get the likes up, get the thumbs up. I did pin in the chat. If you'd like to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can click there and share it, press the notification so you can know when I go live. Definitely want to connect with all of you. So it's good to see everyone that's out there this evening. Please go ahead and share. Hi, Tanya. Good to see you. Carmela, how you doing, sis? Hello, hello. Monique, thank you so much for coming on. Aretha, good to see you. Anybody else that's out there, let me know that you're there. Let me know that you're here to engage in conversation. I'm also going to place in the chat as we get into conversation, if you want to actually join me live and you have a few questions and you just want to engage in an organic dialogue, let's do that. So this evening on the Change Matters podcast, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to do some book reviews. It's important that we do that. One of the scriptures that I like to share is loving God with your heart, soul, and your mind. So I happen to be one that loves God with his mind. And, you can love God intellectually. You do know that, right? You can embrace the Lord with all of the faculties of your mind, with your knowledge, the way that you critique, with critical thinking, with creative thinking, with analysis, with synthesis. All that is important because since the Lord is creator of your mind, it's important that you engage God at an intellectual level as well. And so definitely want to connect with you. So if you're interested, you want to just come on today, I will place the link in the chat a little bit later on as we get into the dialogue and we can have some conversation. All right. So let me know if you're out there. So good to have you. Hope that everyone had a good day. We're going to engage in some dialogue and be right back so we can kick this off today. All right. See you soon. Welcome back to the Change Matters podcast. I'm your change architect, Patrick J. Brown. Thank you for coming on. This evening, we're going to do a book review, and it's really about unlocking history. Unlocking history and why it is important for us to be able to unlock history. Hello, Charlisa. How you doing? Thank you for coming on. So let's think about how important it is for us to tell our stories, because if we don't tell our stories, somebody else will tell it for us. If we don't own our stories, if we are not scribal, where we're documenting, where we are documenting what's taking place in our families, documenting what's taking place in our history, African-American history, American history, African history, your family history and heritage, how important it is for us to document, because if you don't document, perhaps it didn't happen. And so if you let someone else build your world, they will always build it too small. Hey, Nichelle, how you doing? They will always build it too small. They'll build it to their specifications. And that has happened with revisionist history. And so that's why certain individuals that may be in power, whether it's education, whether it's in religion, whether it's in science or philosophy, when we don't document our history, then what ends up happening is somebody else tells the story in a way that doesn't reflect facts, doesn't reflect truth, doesn't reflect our perspective. Hi, Daphne. Good to have you on tonight. So I want to, first of all, focus on 3 books this evening. The first book I'm going to focus on is a book called We Have Been Believers. These are all from my library here in my office. We Have Been Believers, an African American systematic theology. This is the second edition. Now, in this, we're going to really take a look at, I want to do a review, but I also want to discuss it, written by Dr. James H. Evans Jr. So again, this is We Have Been Believers in African-American Systematic Theology. Well, you say, well, Patrick, why are we having this discussion? Hey, Cheryl, how you doing? Why are we having a discussion about this? It's because it's important that we are thinking, and it's important that we ask questions. It's important that we answer those questions, but it's also important that we question every answer that we're given when it comes to history, when it comes to how it's documented, when it comes to stories, when it comes to how those stories are perhaps become revisionist or revised because somebody else embraces it. So if you haven't had an opportunity to sit down with great grandparents or grandparents or aunts and uncles that are still here, this is an important time to do that. It's an important time to document what's taking place in your life, but also your family and also those that have gone before us. So take some time this year in 2023 to really focus on building repositories, whether it's recipe books, whether it's art, whether it's poetry and free verse, whether it's essays, whether it's sermons, whether it's books, whether it's design, certain styles and certain nuances that are indicative or indigenous to your family, then I think it's important that we do that so that we can preserve the heritage that God has given us and preserve the heritage that's been passed on to you and to those that come after you, your children, nieces, nephews, and the like. So I want to start out with We Have Been Believers in African American Systematic Theology, again by Dr. James Evans Jr. In this particular book, I want to set the precedence about loving God with your mind and how in this particular book, I want to just do a review, so I want you to hear me. He talks about the idea of God, and he begins to reference some of the research by Dr. Benjamin Mays in his 1938 study on the Negro's God. Now, that particular study that he did, it examined in depth the idea of God in the African-American experience. So let me read this to you. And this is important because Mays at that time, and in this book, African-American Theology, this particular book, he analyzes different narratives and different research in a body of thought concerning how African-Americans experience theology or God. Absolutely right, Camilla. Legacy preservation is important. Absolutely. So in this work, he begins to analyze classical literature of African Americans. So that refers to things such as sermons or spirituals, Sunday school literature, perhaps, and formal addresses, poetry, treatises, even fiction and some nonfiction. And he examined them through specific periods. And I want to really break this down. He examined the literature between 1760 and 1865. Then the Civil War period to 1914, and then 1914 to 1937. So he did an analysis of 3 different time frames, 1716 to 1865, the Civil War period to 1914, and then 1914 to 1937. And in this, he concluded a common 3 themes or factors that were basic attitude towards God among African Americans. 3 particular attitudes or perspectives concerning God. The first one was God as compensatory. So in that particular narrative or research, God as compensatory referred to those ideas about God as a support, or God that provided or promised divine recompense for earthly suffering. that God will provide recompense for earthly suffering. That was the first perspective that was researched during these particular time frames. Now, when we think about this, of course, that becomes the emergence of several different things that we find in modern day music and culture today. Things such as jazz, things such as blues. All those things emerged, we know, out of the sorrow songs that enslaved people began to develop, which became the spirituals, which became gospel, jazz, and blues, which became soul, which became neo soul and R&B, which became hip hop. So we can trace back that in music and even in poetry, there's a theology. There's this consciousness that there's going to be recompense or reward for the collective suffering of African Americans. And that's what we find in that research, that body of thought. So that was a first perspective that African Americans had about this notion, this idea of God, that there will be recompense for my earthly suffering. That's why you hear it in the old sermons. That's why you hear it in some of our old gospel music or some of our old hymns. We've learned these things and we wrote these things and we begin to chant and begin to recant and we begin to have this understanding that deep within our soul, sooner will be done with the troubles of the world. I go home to live with God. From that notion of God, there was this perspective that there would be recompense from God for my earthly suffering. So in that context of that theology, there's this perspective that I'm pressing through, that how I got over. My soul looks back and I wonder how I got over. These particular theological perspectives gave us the strength to be able to make it through 1760 to 1865, the Civil War period to 1914, 1914 to 1937. In his seminal study about the Negro's God, Benjamin Mays in that study begins to look at three common themes. And the first one was recompense, that God would reward and bring recompense in the midst of earthly suffering. Okay. I'm reviewing the content of this book. We have been believers in African American systematic theology. But why do we need to look at systematic theology? Well, Scripture says, love God with your heart, with your soul, and with your mind. Scripture teaches us that all are getting to get understanding. And if you let somebody build your world, they'll always build it to their specifications. They'll build it too small. They'll build your intellectual world. Matter of fact, most of us, when we go to college, whether it's through a seminary, whether it's through education, regardless, whether it's science, the first philosophy we're exposed to is Greek. We start out with Platonic thought, Socratic methods, Aristotelian logic. We go through the Greek system, which is about, knowledge of self, knowing thyself. There is a particular perspective because to them, knowledge was about accumulation of information. And there was an aristocracy of people who had a particular hidden knowledge. So it's important that we also deconstruct what's been constructed over us theologically and philosophically. Just like race is a construct, then anything that is constructed by the human mind needs to be deconstructed by divinity. So that's why it's important. And what does that mean? Getting that down to the granular level, to the lowest common denominator, at the very cellular, at the smallest bit that you can, to see what the true essence and content and motive is within that particular study or that knowledge that you're accumulating. So that is why it's important for us to be able to look at different perspectives. Because again, the word religion actually means to bind anyway. So if the word religion means to bind, then that would presuppose that whatever we have been trained in, which most of our theologies in the United States comes from Protestant theology, which is right after the split from Catholicism, right? And then also it's not Orthodox, which we can discuss at a later time, but most of it, it's Scottish or it's British or it's Dutch or it's German. It comes from those particular theologies. So it's important that it is okay to legitimize a theology that comes out of your own expression, a view of God, a perspective of God. What makes somebody else's theology more important than yours? You see where I'm going? that even reeks of supremacy. It reeks of arrogance. It reeks of that if it comes from a particular brown or black culture, that it is substandard, and that's not true. So it's important that we're able to look at themes. So the first theme that we see is this idea of God as being one who will provide recompense for earthly suffering. Number two, you say, well, why do we need to know this? Well, we need to know this so that we can be informed and so that we can know we can tell the stories accurately. That is so important that you know that. And matter of fact, the scripture talks about he who the Son sets free is free indeed. When we get exposure to Christ in the proper view, then we experience mental liberation. We experience intellectual freedom. All right. And we're not so much regulated by a particular dogma or catechism that was not developed within a cultural context even. So I think those are important things to consider. So that's the first view of God that we find in the study. Second thing that we find in the study was God as a support for social adjustment, referring to those ideas of God that serve as apologia for the liberation struggle or in defense of the liberation struggle. So that was the second view of God that was developed in this study. First one, of course, recompense. In other words, for the earthly suffering. Second view would be a support for social adjustment, that there are ideas about God that would defend the cause for liberation or defend the cause. That's why in the origin of the Black church in this country, 1787, we know with the AME church that, enslaved peoples, people of color in this country were not allowed to go to other churches at that time. So when those doors are closed, you create your own. Isn't that pioneering? So inherent in the birth of that particular theology is inherent a pioneering vanguard capability. That's inherent in the theology that God is a God that liberates or sets free from oppressive mentalities, oppressive philosophies, oppressive ideologies that keep people bound. Want to hear from you. Kind of quiet out there, so let me know what your thoughts are. We're talking again about, we're doing a book review, and I'm reviewing We Have Been Believers in African American Systematic Theology. So want to have some discourse. If you're out there, you want to come on, let me know. I'll drop it in the chat, and perhaps you can connect with me if you want to come on and ask some questions. It'd be good to hear from you. So feel free to come on in and we can have some conversation. All right. So again, and the third notion that developed was, God was not useful as an instrument. Wow. In the quest for justice and freedom. So there was a hope that began to be deferred. So there were certain perspectives that emerged as a result of the African American experience in these particular three time frames. I think this is important to note that, because as we note that, perhaps it begins to give you an understanding of why perhaps you believe a particular way, why you have a particular theological bent or proclivity towards a certain philosophical expression or ideology that you maybe just inherited in your family and you didn't even know why. Well, here's why. It is because it was handed down from generations of those that created a space for expression of God in a way that fits their particular cultural context. Not that we're trying to wrap up in our own to elevate our own culture, because it's not about that. We know in John chapter 1, the scripture says, and the word became flesh. That's the essence of anthropomorphism. The word became flesh and lived in the community, lived in the hood. That was the essence of what Christ did. The word or the logos or logic of God came into the community. So you have on one end, you have another brand of Americanized Christianity that enslaved, that taught bondage, that reinforced it. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But then you have another emergence of theology that says that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, there is freedom. So yes, absolutely, Hope. Knowing and understanding the truth is important. It is important to know facts. It is important to begin to study history so that you can have accurate facts and stories, also so that you can learn from it, unlearn what was not accurate, and then relearn what is actually factual, not just in the context of Black history or Black theology or the Black church or African American theology, those contexts, but also within the context of your own family, what you're documenting, the repository of your mom, your dad, your background, your aunts, your uncles, great grandfathers, all those that came before you, ensuring that we're documenting that, because you will find wonderful legacies. Whether it's good or bad, you'll begin to understand that those legacies are important for you understanding and shaping the person that you are today. So, thoughts on this perspective? Love to hear from you. Why we need to do that. I'm going to read a few more things I think are important to us. So let's just dive a little bit more. Let me know if you're out there, folks. Love to hear from you. Here's something else that Dr. Evans writes in one of the other chapters. It says, in African American theology, the reality of God's providence is understood to be mediated through the complexities of human experience. Not all human experience, but the human experience of struggle against forces of oppression. So that perspective is that there are other perspectives that says, well, no, that's not what Christ came to do. So in other words, no, it's not about that. God is not specific about doing that, but actually that is the culture, African Americans culture, reality of God's providence behind some of these complexities that we're experiencing. He says the theme of God's providence does not consist merely of abstract elements from God's inner being, but of concrete statements about God's being in the world, about God's position vis-a-vis the world, about God's relationship to a cosmos set askew by injustice. Wow, is that not relevant to the world we live in these United States of America? So let me know if you're out there. What are your thoughts on this? If you want to come on, please go ahead and click on the link. I've posted it there, so I'll pin it. So if you want to be able to come in and ask some questions, so we can have some organic dialogue, that'd be great. Love to hear from you. He also says God's providence in African American theological discourse is intimately related to God's creative activity. God then is not only the source of the dignity and worth of humanity, but God also sustains humanity. Who would not want to embrace that type of perspective? You know, it goes back to one of the roots that I see in this theology, and we have been believers, really takes me back to the importance of the image bearer in Genesis 1, where scripture says we've been created in the image of God and after the likeness of God. And what this does, or at least one of the aspects of his writing, is that the dignity of humanity, the dignity of people, the dignity of Black people, the dignity of the African American experience in those three particular time frames, 1760 all the way up to 1865, from the Civil War all the way up through 1914, and then 1914 up into about 1927, 37 or so. And then we get more into more of the modern era. So it's important that I want to encourage you, if you want to order this book, it's just one of the books from my library. I like to read deep and broad and vast so that I can have a different perspective, but it also shares with me there are certain things in religion that we need to unlearn. And then as we unlearn, then we relearn, of course, with the help of Holy Spirit. And then we begin to emerge with some relearning that might be very helpful. So I think that's important. Thank you, Monique, for sharing that. The perspective you shared are very revealing in regard to our beliefs and mindset as a people. Absolutely it is. Thank you for sharing that. So anybody want to come on, please feel free to click on the link. Let me go ahead and pin that. And you can come on if you would like to. All right. So you just feel free to come on in. So first thing that we read this evening, we have been believers in African American systematic theology. All right. One of the books I enjoy reading. This is the second edition. It's been out for quite a while. And I think this will really help you understand how to understand the origins of those theological frameworks from the African American experience. Any feedback you can offer would be great. All right. Second book I want to look at tonight is a book called Christian Slavery. Christian Slavery, Conversion and Race in the Protestant Atlantic World by Katharine Gerbner. At the time of this writing, Katharine teaches history at the University of Minnesota. And this particular work, I found this incredible as I dove into this because it talks about conversion and race in the Protestant Atlantic world. So we're talking about the Atlantic world in the southern regions of the United States and also in the West Indian islands. And so, in other words, there was some emphasis on Protestant Christianity that had a model of Christian slavery, but so in other words, everything that is Christianized was not Christ. Just because it was Christianized does not mean it reflected Christ. It's important that you deconstruct it from that perspective. Let's take it all the way back to Constantine. Just because Constantine declared the empire Christian did not mean it reflected Christ. It was a term. The word Christian, actually, we find it introduced in Acts because of the multiple expressions of unique cultures, because people were walking in unity, because they were one. It was at Antioch that term was used in the actual Bible. But nonetheless, it's important that we understand just because something is Christianized does not mean that it reflects Christ. So again, we're going to look at this from just a reading perspective, and I'm coming from the book Christian Slavery, Conversion and Race in the Protestant Atlantic World. I want to read a little bit, and then I'd like you to get your perspective. And if you want to come on in and have a conversation with me, by all means, please come in. Thank you, Gloria. Absolutely. Thank you, Latasha. Thank you for coming in. Yes, it is true, Cheryl. Absolutely. It is so true. These are perspectives. Just because something has been Christianized does not mean that it reflects Christ. So many people can claim a title, claim a particular adjective. It does not necessarily mean that it is unfolding the image of God in daily living, but also in how we treat others. If the true indicator is about loving one another, then I doubt very seriously if they really had the kingdom gospel historically in this country. But let's just keep going. All right, let me read something for you. And I'm going to read this from this book on Christian slavery. Reads, watch this. Could slaves become Christian? If so, did their conversions lead to freedom? If not, then how could perpetual enslavement be justified? When Protestant missionaries arrived in the plantation colonies, intending to convert enslaved Africans to Christianity in the 1670s, they were appalled that most slave owners rejected the prospect of slave conversion. Slaveholders regularly attacked missionaries, both verbally and physically, and blamed the evangelizing newcomers for slave rebellion. In response, and again, this is Katharine Gerbner's book and her research on Christian slavery reads, in response, Quaker, Anglican, and Moravian missionaries articulated a vision of Christian slavery, arguing that Christianity would make slaves hardworking and loyal. I got to get a drink on that one. Let me drink my good juice. So, wow. Now, this is plantation Christendom. This is a plantation mentality of Protestant Atlantic Christianity among plantation slaveholders and enslaved people. So I'm going to read a few from here. I dug into this book and I was like, oh my goodness. Now, the early church, Gerbner writes, and let's start out with the early church from a textual perspective. The early church accepted slavery, not only accepted it, but preached enslavement could be spiritually advantageous. just the way that it was preached. Now, what I mean by that is the word slave, the word enslave was used. Slaves of Christ and masters were urged to treat their slaves humanely. There wasn't a ban on Christian slaves. Um, these particular areas, they used it. Even St. Augustine used it as a metaphor for sin and described true freedom as spiritual rather than material. So very, very important that we're able to understand this, because what that does is it sets the stage that it's okay to use the language of enslavement. And so since the language of enslavement was inherent in religion, then it provided a broader way to administer a particular body of thought. Now, I want to read a little bit more of this. All right. If you want to come on, let me know. All right. So something else that I find powerful in this that I want to share with you too is the way that it was legalized. This might be helpful for you to take a look at it. And let me bring this book back up just for those of you that may not have read this book. It's deeper than what you think, and I want you to really check it out. I'll bring it up so you can write it down. There you go. Well, it's not written by a black person. Research is research. Information is power. All right. So I think it's important because once we begin to deconstruct, then we can get down to the root. Now, I'm going to read this. And this is, again, the word Christian slavery was metaphoric for Protestant supremacy in this particular book. So in chapter 2, Gerbner has a title, Protestant Supremacy. I'm going to read this to you. This is powerful. Yes. Look at this. On September 27th, 1661, the Assembly of Barbados passed 2 acts relating to the island's labor force. The name of the act was an act for the better ordering and governing of Negroes. That was the first act. The second act was an act for the good governing of servants. These were 2 acts that the General Assembly of that nation, they passed these 2 acts, and ministers were instructed to read the acts to their parishioners twice a year so that, in quotes, and this is documented, no person may pretend any ignorance in this act or statute or any branch or clause thereof. There are footnotes here. You can research this. This is important. Now, while historians have written about the passage of these acts, analyzing their method of labor control and showing that they set a precedent for other slave codes, they have overlooked the role of the clergy in reciting and reinforcing these laws. This is an important omission, for it was through the mouth of ministers that the brutal labor laws in Barbados were enunciated year after year. So that was in Barbados. There was some that would happen in Jamaica and a few other West Indian nations that actually had Protestant supremacy, or what we call Christian slavery. Absolutely. Yes, manipulation and control methods. What is really being revealed as we research? Yes, we gotta dig into this. They took the word to justify the mammon spirit. Yes, money. You can't love God and money. So here, there's also something else that I find very interesting. And I'm going to read this again. I'm reading from Christian Slavery, Conversion and Race in the Protestant Atlantic World by Catherine Gerbner. Watch this. The Act for the Better Ordering of Negroes was first read in church in early February 1662. It was read in the house of God. And just as our Barbadian laws set a legal precedent for Protestant slavery, the planters set a new religious precedence by creating and articulating an ideology of Protestant supremacy that undergirded and supported a brutal regime of slavery. So let's pause there. Thoughts? See, these were acts of an assembly in that particular nation. Why? Maybe some of us have had relatives that are from those particular plantation nations, colonization nations, right? So when you do your heritage and your DNA background, you never know what your families have experienced. So it's important that you get that background and get the research. So I find this particular book very interesting because it really dives into a perspective that I found interesting as well. Now, there was something else that I read in this that I found very, I don't know, it troubled me, but it also just gave me a perspective. Let me find this real quick. And it was really about the fact that they were responsible for having to go, they were told to go to church. They had to go at least twice per month, and they had to listen to the act be read. Because what that did is they were reinforcing the mindset that this will make you a better servant. This will make you more conditioned. This will make you submit more. This will make you serve more. All right. And that's where we get these hireling ministers. They preached that tender people could claim spiritual authority by giving themselves over to the seed of the indwelling Christ. And as a result of that, they rejected, they began to reject the real reality of who they were supposed to be because of how it was used. My goodness. Powerful stuff. So I think it's important that we're looking at this. Yes, absolutely. Systemic at its best. Yes, it is. Absolutely. Yes, cult behaviors. These are all important perspectives that we need to be able to look at so that we can begin to embrace a proper view of how our theologies and some of our ideologies have been passed down to us. Which is one reason why one of my mentors, Bishop Joey Johnson, who I was going to interview, but we'll be interviewing him at another time. In his book, he discusses the importance of the African-American struggle for identity, the struggle for somebodyness. I think that's the next book I want to go into as far as that. I remember when he was first writing the book and sent me a review copy. We had many conversations around it. And I was like, yes, these are important conversations that we need to have so that we can deconstruct what has been constructed. If race is a construct, deconstruct it. If a particular religious perspective has been constructed, then it needs to be deconstructed. Why? Because it needs to go down to the core bare minimum of why it exists the way that it does. Christ, when you reduce everything and it goes to Christ, then it's a good thing. If you reduce it and it goes back to humanity in the mind of a man, then you need to dispense of it. You need to get it out. Why? Because it's not going to cause you to reflect the image and the likeness of God in your life. So it's important that we're able to embrace that. Wow. Let me read something else from the previous book that I was talking about, just real quick. And I want to just hone in on this one more time. I'll bring it back up to you so you can see it. Again, Christian slavery. The author researched this and said that this particular act, it says the act, it was called the Act for the Better Ordering of Negroes, was first read in church in early February 1662. The reading occurred either before or directly after church services. The transition from sermon to ceremonial recitation likely seemed incongruous, as the slave code contained little reference to the charity of Christianity. The act referred to enslaved men and women as heathenish, brutish, and uncertain, dangerous kind of people, and sought to control every aspect of slave life. Read in the church Sunday morning. And if there was an enslaved person that did not show up for service, right, twice per month, then the slave owner was penalized because of their enslaved person, they're not coming to church because they knew it would be reinforced with this particular act that was actually justified by the assembly of that nation. See how important it is? The way that terms are used and language is used, the way terminology is used. We've got to continue to understand the importance of whatever has been constructed by man needs to be deconstructed by the divine. These are conversations that we just need to have. It says, well, why are you talking about this? I'm just sharing facts. That's all. Okay, it's not to cause anybody to feel a certain way. Okay, facts don't really care about our feelings. Facts are facts. So it's important that we look at facts and not just look at the emotion behind what took place. When you understand facts and you understand truth, then it helps you unlearn, then learn, and then relearn again. All right, so it's important that we're doing that. Then my last book I like to go over, of course, one of my mentors, Precious Man of God. I think I shared again, Bishop Joey Johnson's book on the African-American struggle for identity, the struggle for somebodyness. And I've already read this book in and out, and I saw it and read it through it. And one of the things that he begins to, his premise from what he was really researching was predicated upon Dr. Martin Luther King's speech that he gave in Cleveland at Glenville High School in April 26, in 1967. And I'm going to read his words, okay? Dr. King's words. Now, this is all I'm saying this morning, that we must feel that we count, that we belong, that we are persons, that we are children of the living God. And it means that we go down in our soul and find that somebodyness, and we must never again be ashamed of ourselves. We must never be ashamed of our heritage. We must not be ashamed of the color of our skin. Black is as beautiful as any color, and we must believe it, end quote. So he talks about reaching down in our soul and find that somebodyness, and we must never again be ashamed of ourselves. We did that in the sorrow songs. We did that in the spirituals that emerged from the sorrow songs. We did that from the blues that came from those songs. We did that in the soul music. We did that in the gospel music that emerged from these art forms that were part of our theologies, that this notion of God to provide recompense for my earthly suffering. So in his book, Bishop Johnson's book, he talks about we've got to go down deep down in our souls and find that somebodyness. Find the fact that you have dignity. Find the fact that everyone has dignity and everyone is created in the image and after the likeness of God. Bishop writes, we must feel that we are children of the living God, where the struggle for somebody that has been going on since 1619, when we were brought to this country in chains, and it continues today. The choice for Black people has always been the same: humanity or inhumanity. We've been compelled to struggle for our humanity or accept inhumanity. There is no in between. Oh, I can't wait when I get to interview him and we can dig into this. Now, this is not, his book is not about any individual white person, or it is about the system of slavery that has been acculturated in the structures, institutions, laws, theology, philosophy, and education of the United States of America. So this book gives us an understanding for the struggle of identity and the struggle for that somebodyness in a world where its theologies, its philosophies, its education, its economics, its legal system did not cause anyone to reach down into their somebodyness. He goes into this question that's powerful. He says, one of the questions that he asks in his book was that continues to plague African Americans is, how can African Americans be both black and Christians? The slaves knew that something was wrong with the way the Bible was being taught to them and the lack of love they were experiencing from the same people who were teaching them in the Bible. You know, the founder of the Azusa Street movement, William J. Seymour, in 1906, and he was one of the ones that's known as one of those. One of the key things that he began to experience is that he went to some revivals in Kansas. And this is early 1900s, okay? So you're talking about 1904, 1905. This is in the history books. He went there from where he lived, and there was a move of God at this revival, but he, being a black man, was not allowed to go into the church. He actually had to listen to the sermons and listen to the revival from outside. Racism split the move of God because of supremacist mindsets, Christian slavery, Protestant supremacy, all these particular perspectives. Then he goes back to Azusa, and as a result, we have all the different Pentecostal denominations basically spring from that particular seed. That's interesting. Do your history. Powerful stuff. So as a result, we have Charles Harrison Mason, who established the Church of God in Christ. And then, of course, things continued from there. Different branches based upon revelations that were being unfolded at that time. And so it's important that we understand those experiences happen. Imagining being told, no, you can't come in here. And yet in the middle of that conversation, he's not allowed, but he still stays around enough in order for him to get an understanding and a revelation about the somebodiness that he possessed. And so it's important that we're able to do that. Now, you got to understand, Christianity in America has been conceived through a Western Enlightenment doctrinal literal perspective, which is not biblical Christianity. That's white Christianity. It's not biblical. It's white, and that's fine. It can be white. So I don't use that as a pejorative term. It's not used to exact derision or even negatively, but using it in a descriptive manner because of where it comes from. Even the very pictures that we've seen over the years, which were graven images and idols. But we'll move on from that. I digress. So the essence of his book, at least from what I read, and I read this several times, and we've had discussions on this, and I think it's important that this somebodiness he talks about, he argues that it comes from motor behaviors that Africans brought with them from Africa. Our dance, our call and response. It's funny because now in psychology and therapy, they got tapping. And tapping is supposed to help people deal with stress and anxiety. We've been tapping since we've been here. We've been tapping when we're in praise. You've been seeing, you see the mothers when they hitting it. Yes, God. Yes, God. That is African. It's part of who we are. Now, I guess somebody says it's tapping, to help children deal with anxiety and help them deal with their struggles. Man, we've been doing that for God knows how long. And they say they created this new theory on tapping. And so if they tap, we've been doing it. We've been doing this all along. Clapping our hands, and we've been tapping for quite a while. Just because you coined the phrase does not mean that you created this psychology, this new move. It's been in African culture. It's been in our dance. It's been in our cadence. It's been in our theology. Folks, it's important that we ask questions, answer questions, question answers, and we be exposed to material that's going to cause us to begin to look at the importance of looking at how our theologies have come down through history. Things that we may be able to say, well, it's been researched and coined now, were things that we did all along through our spirituals, through our call and response, even through behaviors like the ring dance that somebody may say, oh, that's emotional. Well, that's because your particular brand of Christendom is didactic. So because it's didactic, you're not used. That's why Certain cultures clap on 1 and 3, and we clap on 2 and 4. You see what I'm saying? It's important that we do not dismiss the essence of where we come from and why God made us the way that he's made us. I often think about Mary McLeod Bethune and how she created Bethune-Cookman. She was a preacher, an incredible preacher who had a vision to raise up teachers. And as a result of that, began to create institutions that still exist to this day because they had a vision that was better than where they were. And thousands upon thousands of students have been educated as a result of one woman's pioneering vanguard vision that says, I'm going to reach down in my somebodyness in God and release that somebodyness into the earth in an institution. That is scribal. That is transformative. It is important that we're able to do that. And that's why on the Change Matters podcast tonight, I wanted to encourage us to begin to dig into some different reading. So I'm going to bring these books up one more time for you. My first book that I looked at tonight was by Dr. James H. Evans Jr. We Have Been Believers in African American Systematic Theology. That's the second edition. Then we looked at Christian Slavery, Conversion and Race in the Protestant Atlantic World by historian Catherine Gerbner. And lastly, The African American Struggle for Identity, The Struggle for Somebodyness by Bishop Joey Johnson. You can find all these books on their websites and on Amazon. These are just some of the books in my library. I got plenty of them, but I thought in honor of Read Aloud yesterday and also in honor of Black History Month, it was important for us to have some discourse regarding African American theology and some and really, I would say, unlocking history. Unlocking history. It's so important that we're able to really think through this and really, yes, these things do need to be discussed. Thank you, Mel. Yes, just important that we're able to do it. It's important that we're able to have these dialogues. Hey, Clarence, good to see you. Bulldog, stand up. Yes, we want to say yes. Good to see you, Bishop Branch. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope that today's conversation really was a strength to all of you. Let me know your thoughts. What are some of your takeaways from the podcast tonight? I want to encourage you to please share this on your pages. If you have not, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll pin it back up at the top so you can do that. Thank you so much for everyone being on. Yes, Hope, thank you so much. I hope that this has been a strength to everyone. Before we leave, I also want to say that I'd be amiss if I didn't bring up my own book. So let me go ahead and put that out there. All right. I wrote Change Matters back in 2014 and published it in 2015. And so I want to encourage you also that if you'd like to purchase a copy, go ahead, because I'm going to be really releasing additional content from my book here soon. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well. If you'd like to order a copy of Change Matters, 21 Principles of the Process, Purpose, and Product of Change. So please, definitely, you can go to Amazon and you can order that. So I'll go ahead and pin that at the top so that you can get that. All right. Okay. Few more things before we head out for this evening. Please bear with me if you don't mind. I want to share a few things about what's happening at a ministry that I serve here in Concord, North Carolina, the Renewal Center. We are the Center for Prophetic Thought, Voice, Art, and Action. A few things I want to just notate. We are having a prophetic gathering coming up April 27th through the 29th here in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's called Being in Sync with Christ. These are our facilitators and our speakers and our faculty. Of course, Bishop Johnson, the author that we talked about tonight, he is one of our speakers. Myself, my team members, and a few of my friends and colleagues in ministry. So please make sure that if you are in the Charlotte area, or even if you're not, feel free to travel, come and connect with us. It's going to be on site, and registration is already open. If you can search for Carolina Prophetic Gathering.eventbrite.com, you can connect with us there. So again, we're sponsoring that. We've been doing prophetic gatherings since January of 2020. I also want to encourage you, those of you that may be in the Concord area, please feel free to visit the Renewal Center. We are located at 159 Church Street here in Concord, North Carolina. We are a nonprofit organization, and we support areas of focus on grief recovery, wellness, hospitality. Our Tea Time Tuesday, every single Tuesday. We have our tea time where you're able to connect with us, where we're focusing on fostering resilience. We're focusing on resetting and refreshing ourselves every first, second, and third Tuesdays at 12 noon, and then on the fourth Tuesday at 7 p.m. So join us for renewal practices. We also have Reforming Culture every first, second, and third Wednesday as well. That is an online course. Right now, we're teaching on principles of spiritual maturity from the book of Ephesians. And then lastly, for those of you that want to support our nonprofit, I also want to announce that we've recently started developing our grief recovery program. And so we have individual grief recovery. If you have gone through any loss and grief and you need grief recovery, we have certifications in grief recovery method, as well as we're going to be releasing our GPS group sessions, which stands for grief, pain, and stress. Our group sessions later in the spring. So we're excited about that. And if there's something that you really need to engage at, anyone that is dealing with grief, we're here to serve you in that capacity. Which leads me to my last announcement. If you, we are currently in a giving initiative as well. So for those of you that want to support our nonprofit organization, just want to show this to you and bring this on the screen so that you perhaps can support the Renewal Center with a donation, or you can become a partner, a renewer with us as we continue to help those in the wellness space, in hospitality, in renewing themselves, and also in grief as well. And so those are the ways that you can support the Renewal Center. I'll bring that up. That's our giving initiative. And here's more ways that you can give to the Renewal Center. So again, I hope that today's podcast has been wonderful. Hope that you've enjoyed it. This has been a good conversation. And I just want to encourage you to, perhaps order those books or build your library. All right. Do some repository, do some documentation. Think about perhaps looking at your background and started documenting your stories so that you can begin to see the value of what's the heritage that's been placed in your family, and you can start reaching your own somebodyness that's within you. All right. So I want to thank everybody for being a part of the Change Matters broadcast, where we have conversations at creative spaces. See you next time. Talk with you soon.